You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. This is another episode about permanent travel, and I'm very pleased to have a special guest who is an entrepreneur, a blogger, or an author of a very interesting book and permanent traveler. It's Pete Sisco. Hi, Pete.
Hi, Jake. Thanks for having me on.
Great. You're very welcome. Very great to have you on the show. Where are you based for this call? Where are you at the moment?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word based necessarily, but I'm right now. I'm coming to you from the favorite place of all British people, southern Spain.
Right. I bet you're surrounded by some British people there, presumably.
I don't have to speak much Spanish.
Right. So I wanted to talk to you because I know that you're a permanent traveler, and I'm very interested to ask you about your life and your experiences with that. But perhaps just to start off, you could give it a bit of a background to how you became a permanent traveler.
Well, sort of starting in the middle of the story, around 2005, I had been earning my income online and only online for several years already. And gradually it began to dawn on me that because all of my income came from online sources, I really had the ability to live anywhere I wanted. At the time I was living in the United States, and I at first got the idea, why am I living in a state that has state income tax? I should move to one of the ones that has no state income tax. And so gradually in that process, I thought, well, why am I even living in a country with federal income tax? And it doesn't work for everybody, but I happen to not be an American.
Right.
So that's a different case than it is for an actual American. It's very difficult for an American to escape their domestic taxes. But so I started to look at the whole world as a place that I could live. And ever since around very early in 2006, I've traveled, and my wife and I, and at that time we still had some of our kids were still younger. We all traveled, and mostly at that time it was in Belize and Mexico, which are two countries I really like. And I did live in Belize long enough to become a permanent resident of Belize. So that was sort of a tactical move because Belize is a tax haven country. If you are a resident of Belize, they're not interested in any income that you earn outside of Belize in terms of taxation.
Yeah.
So I at that time was only a Canadian citizen, but I left when I was in my early 20s. So the deal in Canada is if you don't live there, then they don't have any interest in taxing you.
Right, which is the same.
Right, it's the same
for most countries, except for the Americans.
Except the United States.
Right.
And some other obscure country in Africa.
Yes, Eritrea or something.
Yeah, Eritrea. Yeah, I think it is Eritrea. It's sort of like the metric system, right? It's like the U.S. and North Korea or something. Still on imperial measure.
So that was in the mid 2000s then that you
right. That was late 2005, early 2006, and since then we've lived. I spent a lot of time in Thailand, and we lived in mainland China. Lived in the UK for 6 months. Just Crete, Malaysia. Where it's a very liberating lifestyle, and I've turned into a real evangelist for it because I'm such a believer in the freedom that it gives you. It's unlike anything that human beings have really experienced for centuries, other than people who, would have been born into fantastically wealthy families or something, and because of family wealth, they could just live anywhere in the world they wanted or something like that. But for the average person who has to earn an income and has bills to pay every month, it's almost unimaginably liberating to make income off of an internet business that does not require you to live in any one place. It's an amazing thing. And as I say, even when I was doing it, it took me years to clue in to how powerful it was, because I was still in that thing of, my kids go to this school, so, I guess, it's really difficult to get them out, and they only get so many holidays. But that's a whole other story. Eventually, my level of disdain for the school system rose to the point where I took them out anyway, even before we hit the road.
Yeah, I was really interested to ask you about this, because you're a family man and you're doing permanent travel with your wife and your kids. Is that right? You have kids?
Yes, we have 6 kids, and I hesitate to use the term kids now, because now they're all in their 20s.
Ah, right. Okay.
So they're off doing other things. And I'm happy to say that they live now in I think 4 different countries on 3 different continents. Even in their 20s, they got a much earlier start than I did. So but in the early years, though, we did all go to Belize,
right?
And I think almost everybody went to Mexico. 2 of the kids, we drove about 6,000 or 8,000 kilometers through Mexico with 2 of the kids, which is just a great road trip. I happen to really like Mexico. I love that country. I love being there. So that's a real education. 2 kids riding in the back of a pickup truck and through about 12 Mexican states.
Right. Well, that's fascinating, because you see, we don't have kids yet, and some of the other people who do permanent travel I've spoken to are still single or don't have kids. And so what was your experience of traveling, or going, at least doing permanent travel with kids? Because when I say traveling, I know that you weren't literally getting on a plane every couple of weeks. You were moving more slowly. It's a long-term sort of travel process, as far as I understand, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's what it was. And I'll tell you, my experience was wonderful. And if I have any regret, it's that I didn't pull them out of school earlier and do more travel sooner. That honestly, I don't have many regrets in life, but that is actually one of them. I wish I'd done it sooner. There's a perspective that you gain from travel that is really very difficult to get without the travel. It's unique, really. And in the case, and this is partly, all my wife is American and all my children are American, and so I guess I'm going to say something that sounds kind of negative, but the United States is a very insular country.
Right.
It's sort of, the sun rises in New York and it sets in Los Angeles, and the news, everything that people hear, young people in particular, it's all central to that country. There's very, very little awareness of the rest of the world in a way that is, I think it's fairly unique. I haven't lived in enough places to say that it is unique, but so I had a desire to push back against that. I was always the one saying, well, sure, that's the way Americans see it, but there's another way to look at it, which is this. And I was always pushing back against that. So the travel was, sort of a natural thing for me to want to do. And it's for that reason. It's literally to broaden their horizons. And it's been gratifying that as young adults they've moved around. My oldest left college, and when he was 19, he bought a one-way ticket to China, And because he met a guy who taught English in China and talked about how it was really great and, just kind of sold the romance of the idea. And my son bought a one-way ticket. And because of that connection, he was able to get started teaching English in China.
Awesome.
And yeah.
So did you choose to? You mentioned that even before becoming a permanent traveler, you had a kind of rethink about education and schools and what schools are really all about. And did you choose to sort of homeschool or unschool your kids? Was that the approach?
Yeah. Frankly, both.
Right.
That is exactly what I did, and. We're kind of at the tip of the iceberg here. The bigger thing is that I sort of am pretty opinionated on philosophical issues regarding the individual and the sanctity of the individual and the importance of respecting the individual in a culture. I think the ideal society, which nobody has ever had, is one where every individual would be in complete control of his own life and property. And so when every time I could see that my kids were in any way being pushed away from that into sort of a collective mindset or self-sacrifice that was frankly coercive, where you're basically being forced to self-sacrifice, that really rankled me. And I really did want to find ways to avoid that, if not to push back against it, at least to avoid it. So, I was trying to raise individuals instead of obedient citizens who sort of, for lack of a better term, worshipped the state.
Yeah, absolutely. Instead of people who are being taught to conform. Right.
Well, I would always say that the schools are conformity factories. They are obsessed with getting kids to conform, and I just can't believe that people can't see the flip side of that, that if you have conformity, you lose individuality, and individuality is just a fountainhead of human advancement.
Well, I know that we really are thinking that if we do have kids, we'll definitely go for the unschooling approach. And when I think about my childhood in school and think about, okay, well, what if I'd had the opportunity to be traveling the world, staying in Thailand for 6 months and Mexico, as you said, going through in a car and staying in England for 6 months. I mean, that I think as an experience for kids, it sounds magical. And do you think that your kids, looking back on it, enjoyed the experience? Did they complain at the time, or what was their feeling about it?
I think they would agree that it would have been nice if we started earlier.
Right.
There are certain ages where kids really. Their friends nothing is more important than their friends and time with their friends. And that is not always a good thing. There's social aspects of it that are good, but there are cultural aspects of sort of doing what your friends do and that can be fairly unproductive, is a polite term. There are a lot of temptations for young people, and they can, they can just there's years where they can fall into doing things that aren't the best that they could be doing. So far better, I think, to be going out on a sailboat in the Caribbean Sea and doing fun things with people who are enjoying life and exploring and. Just having the opportunity to see that there are people who live a different way. Our kids happen to have grown up largely in a very small place. I'm talking about a town of 400 people.
Right.
And anybody who grows up in a place like that has a tendency to think that the whole world revolves around everything those 400 people do. And it doesn't. There's so much more to see. So sometimes you just have to make a sort of command decision as a parent and say, well, in my estimation, it would be better if we did this. So that's what we're going to do.
I wonder also another aspect I wanted to ask about was you mentioned your kids' friendships. How have you found friends and family and maybe also your wife, and sort of what challenges have you found with the lifestyle of permanent travel as far as sort of staying connected, or is it not such an issue?
It's not the issue that it once was because of in a word, social media.
Right.
That's two words. That it is amazingly powerful. You and I are talking on Skype right now. We can talk to our kids any day of the week from no matter where they are in the world on Skype.
Right.
They post things on Facebook. We see what the others are doing. You can maintain that connectedness quite easily. And again, it's so much nicer to be doing that from Phuket, Thailand, than from Boise, Idaho.
Right.
Or Stevenage in Hertfordshire.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's nothing against those places. For a guy who grew up in Thailand, he would just be in awe of living in Stevenage or Boise, Idaho. It's all relative.
Yeah. It's about opening your horizons.
Right, exactly. I just like the value of gaining the fresh perspectives all the time. And I swear it keeps you young. It's just the ability to, when you go to a new country for the first time, Malaysia was, I think, one of the newer countries we've been to. And, you see it with fresh eyes. I feel 20 years old because I see all these things with fresh eyes. How does someone in their 50s, it's like you can't pay for that experience, to feel 20 years old again, to go into a store and not know how to ask for something. I actually love that, because it's, in a way, it's feeling youth again.
Fantastic. Okay, let's talk about some of the practicalities. So in terms of financing this, I know that you've been a very successful entrepreneur, and in particular, your background was in online businesses, and that seems to have been a very important aspect in your decision-making about seeing this as viable. So can you talk a little bit more about sort of how that worked for you?
Well, the way it happened for me was I started out in the early 90s writing books for people who lift weights, want to build muscles. And I developed a couple of very, very efficient ways to build muscle. And so I wrote books about those, and those were in bookstores. But as any author can tell you, when somebody buys one of those books for, where you are 10 quid, 12 quid, something like that, the author might get 80p. It's a small royalty, 7%, 8%, 9%, something like that an author gets. So it's a small amount of money. Most people who are authors they don't make much money at it. It's sort of like people who are actors.
Right.
The vast majority of actors make a pittance. So among other things, I wrote those books. But what happened was in 1996, I created a website, and I put the books on the website, and I put links to a new company that was only a year old that hardly anyone had ever heard of, called Amazon. And I never thought much more about it. I put the books up, and here's where you could buy them at this new thing. They sell them online. Well, some time went by, and these were affiliate links. And back then, Amazon only paid every 3 months. And I got a check, and this could have been 2 years later. It probably was. But I got a check for $300. And I thought, wow, it's completely unexpected. How would I make $300? Well, people had started to find that website, and it started to work. So at that early stage, I started to try and develop something else that I could put on there to make more money. And I created ebooks at a time when you had to explain to people what an ebook was. Before you could even sell it to them, you had to explain what an ebook was and how it worked. But the difference was you could sell it for $20 or $30 and keep all the money. And that made an enormous difference. So by working on that and building it up, it turned into something that became very lucrative.
It sounds like you jumped the gun on the self-publishing revolution by over a decade.
Well, yeah. I mean, the truth is, self-publishing goes back to, I think, Thomas Paine's Common Sense in 1776 was a self-published book. Self-publishing goes back a long way, but that online publishing obviously is much newer, and it continues to be very very lucrative. It's getting more established and sophisticated now. And of course, the ebooks now don't sell for $30 anymore. They sell for $2 and $3. So there's a different way to do the marketing now, because you don't have as much margin as you used to. But it's a very, very exciting field, and it's got nowhere to go but up. But there's a lot more growth coming there.
Right. Well, that's absolutely fascinating, and I wanted to ask you. So that's obviously how you got into building your ability to finance your lifestyle. And one of the things that people who choose this lifestyle often talk about is geographic diversification, in particular, sort of for purposes of asset protection and so forth. What are your thoughts about, how important that is, and is it something that you think that is worth looking into? Or what are your views about that?
Yeah, I think it is. It's very important. I mean, it's the more net worth you have, the more important it is. But one of the fascinating things is that you begin to create your own network of people all over the world that you work with. There's a fellow in New Zealand who I have never met in person, but I've done business with him for over 10 years. He's created all my ebook covers. And there's an elegance to that I really love, the fact that he and I can transact business on a value for value basis, and there are no third parties that step into the picture. And what I really mean is there's no governments that step into the picture. Right. There's no international ministry of ebook publication and distribution, graphic design, the International Ministry of Graphic Design, that makes a whole bunch of rules about minimum prices and, who knows what. Right, that they could come up with if you gave the job to Brussels, who knows what regulation they could come up with. All of that just gets stripped away, and two people can do trade with each other from literally halfway around the world apart, and there's never been a hiccup, and the thing that I really enjoy about that is I think that is the future of the world. And I really think, to go into a deeper level, that it is the future of global human freedom. It's the ability of people anywhere in the world to trade voluntarily with anyone they want under terms that they agree to. And no third party with a gun comes in and says, no, wait, you can't. You can't, which just infuriates me. I run into it all the time. I wrote a blog post recently called "Where Did Your Mother Go Into Labor?" And it's this problem that my wife and I run into all the time of where we can live, and it's always, and how long we can live there based on what amounts to, where you were born, where your mother went into labor.
Right,
You don't have anything to do with where you were born. It's about where your mother went into labor. And I told you that we lived in the UK for 6 months. I can live in the UK permanently, but my wife is an American, so she can only be there 6 months. So that's how long we were there. And then we have to pack up and leave.
Right.
Well, why? Why could you be there? Why is it okay for Britons to have this person living in the country, not working there, just spending money? I mean, it's a big win for the British economy. You've got a person who makes money elsewhere but spends it in the country. And you say, well, you know what? You can do that for 6 months, then get out. And in Spain, it's 90 days. In Thailand, it's 30 days. If you get a visa ahead of time, it's 60. On and on.
Right. So it's just kind of random.
Well, there's these rules all over the place. You're constantly, and that's the third party with the gun. Because if I wanted to come to Spain and do business with somebody, that should be between us. There's no coercion. There's no victim, and yet there's always this third party who says, "No, I've made some arbitrary rule, and you have to live by it."
Right.
And I think the future of human freedom is to move past that idea of kings and potentates and prime ministers and presidents, and into a system of voluntary contractual arrangements between individuals or groups and individuals and all those different permutations, so that they can have unrestricted trade between them.
Right, and I know that's the subject that you've gone into in more detail in your book, The Freedom App, which I'm very much looking forward to reading, and I hope that we can have a future episode talking more in depth about the ideas that you've expressed in that as well.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. But I guess the point I was trying to make is that, this is one of the things that I really like about the digital nomad expat lifestyle is the fact that it does elevate your freedom to a new level, and I think it foreshadows a coming wave of human freedom.
Right.
that is pretty exciting.
Right. I wanted to ask you briefly about another just sort of like practical type of issue to do with being a permanent traveler, and that's to do with things like having to interact with the banking system, where you need to get new credit cards, and obviously if you have businesses and so forth, if you don't have a permanent address or if you're not sort of based somewhere, those kind of things can be sort of practical challenges.
Yeah.
How is it a big hassle? I mean, how do you deal with that kind of thing?
It's if anyone ever asked me, it all sounds nice. What are the negatives? That what comes to mind is that when you're sort of pioneering this, like the way we are, it's not just us. I know Andrew Henderson, the
Yes.
nomad capitalist. He does he has a similar lifestyle, and there are actually a lot of us out here doing this kind of thing. But the common inconvenience is that all of these systems are not set up for people like us. So, I've had trouble renting a car because I had a British passport, but not a British driver's license. They were, so they're from two different countries. So the rental car company goes, well, we're not used to that. How come you got a passport from one country and a driver's license for another one? That's a problem. We're not going to rent you the car. Or when you want to get a driver's license, you have to have some kind of residency card. Like if I'm in Spain, if I wanted to get a Spanish driver's license, they would say, well, where's your residency card from Spain?
Right.
Well, I don't have a residency card from Spain. Well, now you could get one, but I to do that, I got to go through a lawyer, and I got to show my British passport, and then start this whole sort of process. And eventually, I would get that card, and then with that card, I could eventually get a Spanish driver's license. I tried to get a British driver's license when I was there, and because I was living there, I had an address, but they say. Well, with the driver's license you have now, we'll give you a license. You can get a license, but not to drive a standard transmission, only an automatic transmission. Well, I've been driving a standard all my life. I learned to drive in the deep snows of Canada on a standard transmission. So. It's an insult to say, well, we'll give you one. And then the other thing they'll say is, if you want a motorcycle one, I got to drive some, 125cc motorcycle for 2 years or something. Well, that's ridiculous. I drive big motorcycles. I ride the biggest motorcycles I can get. I'm a pretty big guy, and I ride big motorcycles. A 125cc motorcycle wouldn't haul my butt up a steep hill. So I find myself in these dilemmas all the time. You can open a bank account, but you need this piece of paper. You can stay here another 60 days, but we got to have this. You can't rent a car because, your mother went into labor in Canada.
Right.
And that's frustrating. And I think that in 10 or 20 years, the way that I and others live will become quite commonplace. I think there's no doubt that this is going to catch on. More and more, millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people are going to realize they can make a living from anywhere. And at that point, things will begin to change. Medical insurance, that's another one where they say, well, depends where you live. And, oh, you're Canadian. Sure, we can get you supplemental coverage. Just show me your Canadian card. Well, I haven't lived in Canada since I was 26 years old. That's a long time. It's getting close to 30 years since I lived in Canada. I don't have any cards for Canadian medical. Oh, well, we don't have anything for you.
Right.
But it has to be based on your citizenship. But they presume, yeah, but you live there right now and you're part of the government program there. And if you're not, you're constantly a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah, it's like the whole system is set up on the basis that people stay put and just work their whole lives and then retire there. And if you don't fit into that pattern, you kind of come up against the bureaucracy, sort of against the grain in everywhere that you go, I suppose. Which and
it's absolute silliness. There's no reason why I shouldn't be able to get a driver's license in any country because I'm a good driver. But there's no way to do it. They've always got their a whole list of rules, and frankly, to be honest, they're always tied to taxation.
Yeah,
it's always tied to, look, how do we know where all your money is, and how do we make sure you are paying us, 30 to 70% of your income every year? Really, they can say, public safety, or, they always have reasons for why they have these restrictions. But in all candor, what it comes down to is how can we sign you up so that we know all of your financial business and you pay us half of your annual production in taxes? And that's not that great a deal, I'll take a taxi, if you're going to make it that hard for me to get a driver's license, I'll take a taxi.
Right.
Because I'm not giving you half of what I make.
Right. Well, you've definitely outlined some of the kind of negative experiences that you've had that are associated with this lifestyle. That's one of the things I was going to ask you is, what are some of the down experiences that you've had? What about some of the best experiences that you've had being a permanent traveler?
The best experience is that you can take advantage of any opportunity that is important to you. So If my daughter is graduating from university, I can be there. If my son has time off from what he's doing in China and he's going to go to Thailand for a couple of weeks, I can be there. If we want to go to the Halloween party at Frankenstein's castle in Germany, we can go. Little things that are important to you with friends, with family, big international events, you have the freedom to participate in any of those. My wife and I were joking that if we had 2 weeks off, we wouldn't know what to do with it. I mean, it stops having any meaning because we always have. There's nothing with 2 weeks off. There's nothing that we couldn't do, or there's nothing that we could do that we couldn't do on any 2 weeks of the year anyway.
Right.
It is a completely different perspective with freedom that is so complete. It really is a challenge to get used to that. It's a challenge to get used to how much freedom you can have, because if the weather turns bad, we move.
Right. Yeah.
And that's just unheard of, who does that? So it's, and we've done things like that, we're living in some place and then construction starts next door. Well, goodbye.
Right.
Go live somewhere else.
That's totally awesome. It's great to hear about, and it's really inspiring too. And I mean, this is something that I'm doing more of, or me and my partner. We're, as you say, when the weather changes, we're moving off to Mexico for the winter. But we're not permanent travelers yet. And for people who are thinking about it, a lot of people who listen to my show are entrepreneurs and looking to build their futures. And so for people who are interested in this lifestyle, what would be some closing thoughts that you have for them about, key things for them to think about?
I think one of the better pieces of advice I could give someone who is thinking about this is investigate your fears, because what will prevent you from doing it is some kind of fear that some bad condition will exist. Like you might think, well, I only speak English, and I use that as an example because I remember being intimidated by that. I remember thinking, I don't know, I'm going to these countries. I don't speak German. I don't speak Thai. I don't speak Chinese. How's that going to work? I mean, how's that going to work? If you speak 6 languages, more power to you. I've got, utter respect for people who speak many languages. I don't. But I think if you could only speak one, speaking English is the one to have globally. And if, getting back to my point, investigate your fear. I think that if you do that, if hypothetically that was a fear, and then you talk to people about that, investigate it, read online, you'll find out, hey, you know what? That's actually not any impediment to worry about. Lots of people did worry about it. It's not a problem. And I think that if you investigate whatever the fear is you have of sort of, living globally or earning an online income and living globally, you'll find one by one that all of those problems have been solved by thousands of people before you. They've all been solved. And this is why people are doing it successfully, and it's why certain people like me rave about how great it is. Because it really is a wonderful way to live. And even if you'll only do it for 3 years or 5 years or 12 years, it'll be a fantastic chapter in your life.
Awesome. I think that's really a great note to finish on. Pete, thank you so much. It's been great fun talking to you.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you, Jake. Thanks again for having me on.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you have feedback about the show, please email jake@thevoluntarylife.com. If you enjoyed this program, please share the podcast with your friends or click the donate button on thevoluntarylife.com.